All right, we're right at noon. We're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us today. This is the webinar, Contact Center Transformation with AI. Technology is not enough. So we'll go ahead and kick things off. Before I introduce you to our speakers today, I'd like to go over a few quick logistical items. The session is being recorded. We'll be sending out the recording to everybody that registered following the session. Everyone is automatically muted. If you have a question or have an issue, please use the chat at any time to reach out to us. You can also raise your hand if you're having an issue, and we'll reach out to you over chat. We are going to be reserving about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A, but we want this to be a dialogue, so share your thoughts at any point. Now I will introduce us to our speakers. We have Tom Thielen. He's the Director of AI-enabled customer service at 1904 Labs. Before joining us, Tom spent about 7 years managing technology, product, and operations teams at Centene, including its customer service product strategy, and has a very long history helping enterprises realize the potential of tech. We also have Carol Riggi. Carol is currently the Solution Methodology and Research Lead at 1904 Labs. She has been a practitioner of user experience and human-centered design for over 30 years, having taught thousands of students and has been published multiple times. And before I hand it over to Tom, just a quick intro of 1904 Labs. We are an IT consulting company based here in St. Louis. We help enterprise companies build human-focused modern software and data solutions. Related to AI-enabled customer service. In this space, we're really focusing on what are the human challenges that people are dealing with in the current contact center journey, and how can we help solve those with AI. And at this point, I will turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Alexandra. Hi, I'm Tom Thielen, and we are excited you've joined us today. This will be the first in our series of webinars we have planned on the topic of AI-enabled customer service. Today, Carol and I are here to talk about how organizations can realize truly transformative improvements in customer service. In just the last few years, we've seen the emergence and maturation of new technologies in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing that will dramatically change how customers interact with your organizations over the next 5 years. The wave has already begun with new tools such as AI chatbots, real-time sentiment analysis, and coaching and support tools for agents, and now AI voice bots able to answer phone calls. Much like personal assistants that you all are accustomed to, such as Siri and Alexa, but again, able to answer an incoming phone call. So before I go on, I just want to pause and level set. As you've guessed by the title of our webinar, we're not actually here to talk about the technology today, but we don't want to dismiss the importance of the technology. It's really very, very impressive. And Carol and I and Alexandra have many colleagues who are amazing engineers and partners such as AWS who continue to push boundaries of what's possible with these customer service solutions. So what we are here to talk about today is what's necessary beyond the technology to effectively capture value. And in order to do that, we need to focus on the humans, the customers that are making the calls. What's necessary for them to feel comfortable speaking with a voice bot or intelligent virtual agent on the telephone and wanting to interact with it. Otherwise, if they don't want to interact with it, they will exhibit similar behaviors to what they do today when they call and are greeted by a confusing menu of options in a traditional IVR system, which is to ask to speak to a live agent. So first, we're going to start with a few examples of what we mean by an intelligent virtual agent, and then get right into how to apply HCD, UX, and the new science of conversational UX design to creating and deploying effective IVAs. So our agenda is pretty straightforward. We are going to have a little bit of a history. Then we'll talk about an overall approach to designing and building IVAs, and really focused on the design side. Then talk about, as Carol says, the three legs of the stool. So, and then get into a little more depth of what designers think about when they're focused on a conversational design, and then some core CUXD concepts. Lastly, we'll touch on some aspects around testing and style guides, and then we'll wrap up and do Q&A. So, we're going to start by talking about intelligent virtual agents. And before we dive in, we're going to take a look at what was leading edge in the 90s. And for that, we've got an attempted impersonation of a IVR.
Hello, and welcome to Movie Phone. If you know the name of the movie you'd like to see, press 1.
Come on.
Using your touch-tone keypad, please enter the first 3 letters of the movie title now. You've selected Agent Zero. If that's correct, press 1.
What?
You've selected Brown-Eyed Girl. If this is correct, press 1. Why don't you just tell me the name of the movie you selected?
So as you could see, his impersonation was neither virtual nor all that intelligent, but it leads us to our history, which will get us to where we are today. In terms of customers interacting in a voice manner with organizations, goes back to technology first developed in the 60s that you all are aware of, where you press a button on the phone and you get to another menu option. In the 90s, things got a little more advanced with Microsoft's Clippy. And then moving forward into this millennium, we all became familiar with personal assistants such as Siri and Alexa. And now, from the makers of Alexa and other technology firms, we have natural language models that really enable conversations to go on in a real-time interactive manner between a human and a robot. So we're going to show a few examples of what we mean when we talk about an intelligent virtual agent and how they would converse, how they are able to converse with a human.
I found an account linked to your phone number. Am I speaking with Judy Klein?
Yeah.
Hi, Judy. I see you have an upcoming service appointment on Tuesday, December 10th. Is that what you're calling about?
Yeah.
Please say the insurance policy number associated with the loss.
057 2860. C as in Charlie 3023 B as in Bravo.
Was that 057-286-0C3023B?
Yes.
Your account has been verified. How can I help you today?
I need to find out if I can stop the automatic withdrawal from my account on the 1st of March.
Did you want to cancel auto pay on your membership?
Yes.
So hopefully everyone now understands what we're talking about when we say intelligent virtual agent, and it is truly a robot that is speaking with a human over the phone. And when we think about how to create such a robot, we look at it from a point of view of what needs to be done to build from a technology point of view, what needs to be done from a testing perspective, and then how to deploy it and make it available via the phone. This is much akin to having some wood and some nails and some hammers and some saws and being ready to build a house. But before you can start building the house, or at least if you're going to do a good job of building that house, you need to begin with something that is missing from this page. And for that, I'm going to turn this over to Carol to talk a little more.
Yeah, so thanks, Tom. And that was a great overview and intro. I know when I started working in this space, it was always a little fuzzy to folks. Are you talking about the press one for this, or is it really talking? And what do we mean by IVA, intelligent virtual agents? So that really put it into a frame. And you're absolutely right, Tom. Like, to build something, this lays out a process that you're showing here. But you mentioned something that's missing, and not only is it missing, but it actually has to happen first. So if we can go to the next slide, this thing that we're calling is called conversational UX design. We mentioned it earlier. You'll hear me say CUX or CUXD. It's a critical component of creating IVAs, intelligent virtual agents. IVAs are intelligent. They're IVAs, but they don't train themselves. There is a science to it, as Tom was saying earlier. And it's a relatively new field, conversational UX design, but in many ways, it's very similar to how we approach all human-centered project development and design. So if you're familiar with UX or HCD, human-centered design, other similar approaches, CUX design is very similar in a lot of ways. So, when we talk about robots, Tom, you and I were talking about this yesterday. Like, what did you say about what an IVA sounds like?
And thank you, Carol. And this is exactly what came to mind when Carol was explaining how HCD and CUXD work in the realm of this technology. And I always think about how to explain what I do at work to my mother. And so when I think about that, I think, an IVA is a lot like a robot. And what we're really doing is training a robot to speak to a human. And if you think about the robot as a blank sheet of paper that does lots of interesting things, it's a great way to start, but it hasn't yet been trained.
Gotcha. And that makes sense. So like you could build a robot, but it's almost like it's dumb, right? It doesn't know how to talk to a human. It doesn't know how to listen and understand, right? This is where that first block of stuff that just came up on the slide comes into play, right? There's this whole field of CUXD is basically teaching a robot how to converse with humans. And the title of this webinar is It's More Than Technology. It absolutely is.
So, and I just want to make a point here when we talk about robots. We're talking about robots that can speak to humans, and we have other robots that do other things, such as a Roomba, which is a robot that is trained to vacuum your floor. And the Roomba may someday be able to talk to us and have a nice conversation, but right now what we're really focused on is the aspect of robots that can answer a phone call.
Right. And I'm not sure I want to talk to my Roomba. I don't know that I would like what I heard, but anyhow, neither here nor there. But the point of what we're doing is we're training robots to talk to humans, right? And so what better way to do that than with a human-centered approach, right? We know what human-centered design is. We have a framework for that. We don't want to reinvent that whole wheel because now we're in a new IVA space. So let's take a look at what we can repurpose and learn from human-centered design and UX that works. It's very similar to CUX, conversational UX design, very similar to the tenets of UX design. First off, it has to start early before development. So you want to learn about users and their tasks before you start building the solution. Second, we have to actually engage users in the design. So just trying to imagine how humans will speak to the IVA, that's really not enough. It's not a substitute for doing things like in the example of a call center, like reading through logs of phone calls. So you can actually get insights into the actual words and conversations that are happening when a customer calls a call center. And there's other methods for doing that research. Next, we use prototypes in CUX design, just like we do in UI and UX design. Rather than like building something, crossing your fingers, deploying it and hoping it works, right? It's really cheap, fast, and easy to get feedback before you put things out in the world. They always say you only get one chance to make a first impression, right? So you can kind of knock out some of the kinks before you deploy with prototypes. Also, we document standards and patterns, right? We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but to ensure consistency, to speed up development time, you have things like standards, pattern libraries, and style guides. And then lastly, for now, with any design effort, we want to focus on what we call the 3 legs of the stool. We're going to kind of drill down on that now. So what do we mean by the 3 legs of the stool? So any product needs to address the wants and needs of each of 3 key elements, right? The business, the humans, and the technology. And you've got to do this in a balance. You have to consider and balance those needs one against the other. I'll just give a really kind of broad example. Let's say you're building an IVA, intelligent virtual agent, without learning about its users, and you're just so enamored of the technology because it's really cool. As Tom was describing earlier, there's a lot of amazing cool stuff that it can do now. But you just said, let me just focus on the technology. We'll worry about the users later. You might wind up with a really well-functioning, in terms of functionality, IVA that doesn't do anything that anybody needs it to do, right? So like, what's the point of that? You forgot the users, you've got a really cool tech, but it doesn't solve anybody's needs. On the flip side, if you design like a perfectly human-centered conversation, right, that is absolutely pristine, but you never talk to the engineers who actually have to build the IVA, you may have designed something that really isn't implementable, right? That happens a lot. It's like very, very blue sky and ideal, but then when you actually have to go build it, it's just not possible. Now, if you manage to like solve those 2 problems, let's say you did achieve that balance we were talking about earlier, and you got those 2 legs of the stool going, but you just increase the price of the project by a factor of 10 or 20, right? Because you're trying to solve that problem. Well, now you're not serving the needs of the business, right? So the talent and the skill in all of this is to balance those 3 legs of the stool. And we're going to drill down a little bit more because this is really a critical component of any of this work. I'm going to toss over to Tom to talk about the needs of the business and the business stakeholders. What drives, in your experience, Tom, like who are the business stakeholders usually involved in these kinds of projects, and what are their drivers?
So when we're talking about customer service and contact center and essentially serving customers, we think generally about 3 groups within any organization. The first being sales and marketing, and we're talking about customers, so they are very interested in what's going on with their customers. They are really primarily focused on sales and revenue, which means conversion rates and retention rates, which then, if you think about how a customer is feeling about the company that you work with, you then get into kind of metrics such as net promoter scores and customer satisfaction scores, and a lot of that is driven how they interact with your contact center. So that group has one set of focus, which is really top line. The next area is really the contact center operations executive team, and they're really focused on cost and quality. So from a cost point of view, what's the cost of a call that is handled by a live agent, which gets into labor costs such as hiring, training, and retaining the customer service agents. And then following that, getting down a little more into the call center, they're thinking about deflection rates and containment rates and average handle times, all really focused on cost. And then the other side of that is the quality, which some of the metrics are the same. So if you think about customer satisfaction, that's that's an indicator of quality for calls that are handled in a contact center, or could be text-based contacts as well. But that's really where their focus is. And then the other primary kind of stakeholder in this is an IT organization, and they care about cost, and they care about ease to deploy, ease to maintain, and how any new technology might fit within their existing ecosystem and platform. So, and really, it's the balance of those three that have to come together, and agree on and align essentially on what's important. And this is where we have a lot to say with IVAs. But before we do that, Carol, back to you and the humans.
And when you use the word alignment, that kind of, I thought that was, you could probably talk for hours about how to align stakeholders, right? At the beginning of a project, because in my experience, a lot of times those different constituents really have different goals, different ideas. And our human-centered approach, we try to get those folks on board and aligned from day one, because otherwise, anybody's needs. But yeah, when we talk about humans, it's anybody who's affected by the IVA. We usually think of the customer, the person making the phone call, but those are the obvious humans, those callers, customers wanting to return something they bought, or somebody filing an insurance claim or something like that. Those but those are kind of widely different. And I bring up those two examples because not all humans are created the same, right, and have the same needs. So one person calling for one purpose is very different than somebody in a totally different context. And of course, so by extension, not all IVAs can be created the same. And then there's other humans too. It's not just the customers. Tom, you and I, again, we talked yesterday about like the other folks in the food chain of the IVA, like the contact center agents, and I know you have extensive experience working with them. Like, tell me what you know about the agents themselves.
Well, I like to talk about the agents who are really good at what they do. And if you sit next to them and are able to listen to them on taking calls, it is mind blowing for me, because I have neither the patience nor the demeanor that they do to handle especially difficult calls from a customer who's got a problem or a challenge and starts the call in an unhappy mood. And the really good customer service agents are able to have a conversation where it sounds like they're at a birthday party. They're happy, they are empathetic, but they're cheerful. And what's really impressive is to see them carrying on a conversation while they are looking at their screen in their CRM screen and other systems, looking up who the customer is, what their prior interactions were, and then looking around on how to help them with their problem, all in a very seamless manner. So the customer has no idea what's going on, other than this is someone they really enjoy talking to, and the ones who do it really well end up changing the mood of the customer, because by the time they get off the call, they feel like someone has listened to them, they've been heard, and they feel confident someone's going to take some action to solve their problem.
So the agents, they're trained, they're probably naturally empathetic as well. So that kind of brings up, like, do we actually have to train our robots to be empathetic? And like what are is that where we have to go with this?
I think so. If we want the robots to actually interact with humans who might not be in a great mood, they have to be able to sense that in some manner and react accordingly. And so this goes into the art and the science of what you do, which is thinking about personas, thinking about the personality of the robot, how to design all that in based on what you find out about who the customers are, how they behave, and then looking at what really good customer service agents do to handle those difficult situations.
And all of that stuff is what we were talking about earlier, right? That's ideally should happen well before we start building anything, right? To learn all of this before you actually start digging into how do we solve the problem technically, right?
Yes, yes. And so while there's some fundamental technology that probably needs to be in place, it goes back to the blueprint in the house. And we can send people out to start hammering nails into boards, but if they don't have that blueprint and a guide, they're going to build something that may not look like the house you want.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And we can't just sort of rely on, best practices, or we'll just take the last one we built and repurpose it, right? Because there's so much nuance to all of these contexts. And that again, that's very similar to what we do for UX, UI type of, human-centered approaches. And so talk to me a little bit about the technology. Now, let's assume we've done all that stuff up front. Like, how to add that third leg of the stool.
So if you are thinking about discovery, we're doing these three in parallel, and this is the technology side. So any organization is going to have their existing call center or telephony platforms that that people are using. They'll have CRM or customer systems. They'll have operational systems, and then they'll have preferences on what sorts of technology they like to have and how other technologies fit in within that in their platform. And so understanding all of that is really understanding the opportunities and constraints that may present themselves that are unique to any organization. So really important as a team starts thinking about how to design the actual IVAs.
Gotcha.
To answer phone calls.
So let's make an assumption that we've done this discovery, because there's technical discovery, business discovery, human discovery. We've done all of this work. We've done this upfront stuff. So now how do you begin to actually craft the solution? How do you start to train your robot so that they can have human conversations? And this is the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is conversational UX design and how that comes into play. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about just conversation. Conversation is one of these things we don't even think about. It seems very easy. And that's because we're kind of humanly wired to have conversations. We've been doing it since very, very tiny people. And the slide here, much like a fish is not aware it's in water, right? We're not aware of are having conversations. We're not picking them apart as we're having them. We just naturally have conversations. It's instinctual. But if we actually stop and break it down, we could define conversation as it's a set of verbal or text-based interactions that is heavily contextual and inherently social. So that's one of the textbook definitions of conversation. And with that definition, it kind of implies there's a lot of subtlety, there's a lot of nuance, there are subtle cues, there's nonverbal stuff going on. Conversation is extremely complex when you step back and you try to look at it more objectively and scientifically, and actually then try to design a conversation. So conversational UX design, CUX design, is really sort of a specialty area of experience design. And it's focused on defining those interactions between humans and virtual agents. And it's totally based on how people communicate in real life. That's the key. Everything starts with the human conversation. So the idea of training your robot is all about designing and building an IVA that anticipates and responds to the human. The goal is never to create a tool where you need to train the human to talk to the robot, right? It has to be the other way around. So you shouldn't have to take a tutorial before you pick up the phone, right? It should be a natural human conversation. And again, as such, the CUX design field is a lot harder than it would appear on first glance.
So I understand the term of the science, but I am not an expert in this science. We think that it would be valuable for all of you to kind of take it up a level at my level, and so we're going to move forward, and I'm going to ask Carol a series of leading questions that may not seem obvious at all until you start thinking about how you might design an IVA or a robot to talk to your customers. The first is what tone of voice or what sort of speaking style should they have? Or should they be formal, informal, friendly, serious? How should that, is there a right or a wrong answer?
So anybody who knows people like me who do this for a living, the answer to everything is going to be it depends, right? So I'll just give you that heads up. It depends. I'm gonna kind of think aloud so you can kind of hear how I reason through the answer to these questions, to give you a flavor for like what is entailed in this whole thing. So should it be serious? Should it be fun? Should it be whimsical? Well, first of all, I would ask, what's the task, right? Why is the person calling? If they're calling about something, very serious, and you're all chatty and making jokes, and Alexa can be chatty and make jokes, and other IVAs can do that. If it's not appropriate to the task, it's going to feel really weird to the human, right? It's going to just feel off kilter. And so you don't want to be off-putting to your human. What is their state of mind, right? And so you want to be able to match that to some extent. Another question I would ask is, what is your company's brand? Are you known as a very serious company? And then wouldn't it be weird if your IVA was just all, making jokes and chatty? That consistency across your brand communication extends beyond things like advertising and websites. It goes to your IVA as well, right? So you want to come across as one company. So the task, the nature of the task, the state of mind of the human, and the company brand would be some of the first things I think about in response to your question, Tom.
Thank you. That's helpful. And now we'll go on to the next one, which I think it makes me laugh whenever I see it, but then when you think about it for a second, it seems very important. And that is, what should the IVA or the robot do if the caller or the customer asks for something it can't do? Should it apologize for not understanding? Should it take some other action? And when you think about at least when I think about it in terms of how I speak to other humans, it depends, but I'm sure you have a little more to say than just it depends.
Yeah, but I'm glad you said it depends, though, because that's always a good answer. Never the wrong answer. So again, going back to something I said earlier, all of this CUX design starts with the human conversation, right? So I'm thinking, okay, what's the human? What happens if, Tom, you say something and I can't hear you? I'll say, sorry, I didn't get that. Right. And it's not like I'm self-flagellating an apology. It's just sort of a colloquial, sorry about that. Hey, there's no blame, really. It's just the nicety that you always say sorry. So I would say it's probably a good idea for the IVA to humanize it a little bit, to just say, sorry, didn't get that. Right. You don't over apologize. So let's say the second time you repeat yourself, and then I say, sorry, I didn't get that. And then the third time, sorry, I didn't get that. And I start sounding, for lack of a better word, robotic. The repetition of the apology is going to start getting a little annoying, right? Just on a human level. So that would be one consideration. And I would ask myself as a designer, okay, maybe the second time I don't say I'm sorry, right? Maybe the second time I say something a little different. Or even better, maybe I say, Tom, you know what? I think you're talking a little low for me. I'm a little hard of hearing. Can you say it louder? Right? Because then I'm giving Tom a clue about why I didn't get it. It wasn't that he said something I don't understand because he spoke in Vulcan or some odd, language that I don't know. Right? So now I'm helping, like, I'm not training him to talk to me as much as giving him a cue as to, maybe this is why I didn't understand it. I think the last point I want to make on this one is a really, really important one. If Tom says something and I'm the robot and I don't get it, I shouldn't say, you screwed up, man. Why did you said a word I didn't understand? Go back and fix it, right? Never blame the user, right? it's always going to be the robot's fault on some level, right? So that should be your attitude. It's never the user's fault, right? Even if they say wacky things, because users do that. Just as an attitude, you just want to get better at training the robot. So again, hope that covers some of it. There's a lot to it.
I think that is really helpful. I think you said something there that I thought it leads us straight into this next question, that is, when the robot starts saying, or the IVA starts saying the same thing kind of over and over again, sounding mechanical, I think that to me is off-putting, and I feel like I'm stuck. And so how do you make a decision in terms of how you proceed if the robot isn't just getting it and say, hey, we actually need to have some help from a live customer service agent?
Yeah. So it depends. There are rules of thumb here too, but generally, too few times, like if I pass you off to an agent after one misunderstanding or one misheard or unheard utterance, the whole idea of having an IVA gets kind of defeated, right? Because the idea is to deflect calls to the agent. So you want to handle them. You want to give it your best shot to handle it in the IVA, right? So that's if you pass them on too quickly. If you wait too long, I mean, until you're telling the customer 5-6 times, still don't get that. Can you try again? You know where that's going, right?
Yes.
So too many is not good. Like how many times you've heard it maybe 3 times or something like that? I don't know, something like that. It's close, but you have to, again, though, keep these other things in mind. What's the state of mind of the user, right? So who's calling and what are they calling about? If it's like their kid was just in a car wreck, that's a different call than I'm looking into vacations on sale for 2022 from this cruise line, right? So again, you gotta think about all these things when you're making those decisions.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, so as we're speaking, and we often do, if I ask you a question, you may answer, and then you may end the answer with, did that answer your question? And so that leads right into this next point, which is, does the robot or the virtual agent need to confirm everything that a caller is saying, or some of it implied? How does that work in terms of designing the robot so it can have a comfortable conversation with a human?
Yeah, no, this is a fun one. And if you get into the literature, you'd be surprised at how many different variations of confirmation styles there are. And again, it depends. What is the nature of the interaction? So you heard in the video earlier, somebody gave it was their ID number or something like that. And imagine you're calling your health insurance company or something. They want to be sure you're the right person, right? So you're giving them a number. It's probably good to confirm that by reading the number back and saying, did I get that right? Right? If you're, on the other hand, asking Alexa, I shouldn't say that too loud, that person, that thing, to turn on your living room lights, and you stand in the living room, and then she says to you, did I hear that correctly? Would you like me to turn on your living room lights? Why didn't you just turn on the lights? I would have told you if it was wrong after the lights go on, right? I mean, there are some actions that are just best done without to have that explicit information. And there's different variations of how explicit confirmations are. And that, like, for example, the second time you can paraphrase, and maybe the third time you don't confirm, and they're called implicit and explicit confirmation. So there's all different kinds of things you want to think about here. Again, I'll spare you all of my thought process because it's a scary place to be. But hopefully that gives you a flavor of that question.
So that's really helpful. And I like listening to you tell these stories, because every time you do, I learn something new. Something else kind of clicks in my head about it. The next question that we want to talk about here is, when is it appropriate to have a virtual agent talk about and suggest to a caller that they could use their keypad to maybe choose an option versus trying to speak it in a way that the agent could pick up.
Yeah, that's another really good one. And this goes to consistency and style. An enterprise will have a rule that they'll try to apply across the board, and that rule can depend on, again, who's the caller, right? So I'll use one example. Imagine like the difference between a millennial calling a particular company to buy a particular item that appeals to millennials versus like your elderly grandparent calling Medicare or something along those, again, very gross examples, but how much cognitive load do you want to put on that caller at the beginning to say, give them a whole litany of stuff they could possibly do down the line of the call, right? Maybe that would be helpful, maybe it's not. Maybe you just want to cut to the chase. Maybe the call flow is very, very simple, and then now you've just wasted your caller's time in stuff that they don't even need to know because they could just move down the flow. So it's kinds of things like that. Again, who's calling? Why are they calling? How complex is the interaction and the task?
That's really helpful and for me to understand and think about in terms of then the virtual agent is taking a call and they don't have to explain everything up front, but they can explain it if needed as necessary as the call goes on.
Right, exactly.
That makes perfect sense to me. And then the last one we want to talk about, which is I think something that we all, or at least all of us who have children on this, spent a lot of time with when they were young. Mine are now teenagers, and the point is when is it okay to interrupt, and how does that work? And so is it do we train the virtual agents or the robots to interrupt? How do they react if a caller interrupts?
Yeah, that's a two-way interruptions, right? And I'm from New York City, so this is like mother's milk to me. I do it all the time. Usually we think about it as the caller interrupting the agent, right? Because the agent is going through, again, a litany of choices, and the caller's ready. They know what they want, and they just start speaking their choice. And interruptions in that case is probably doesn't have to listen to the things they do the second. On the other hand, depending on how you've ordered and layered your option, you might have, cut off the user, cut off the customer before they got to the one that they really want, and they may have to listen to all the choices, and you've gotten those before, right? Please listen to all these choices. But saying that is annoying as heck. So there's all those trade-offs as well. Again, it really depends on the task, depends on the seriousness of the task, depends on the order of the options. But usually allowing customers to interrupt is not a bad thing. Rule of thumb.
So the customer is always right.
Boy, that's that has never changed, has it? Good point. So we're going to fly through this next couple of slides because we want to have some dialogue and do some Q&A with you guys. So just really briefly, there's some concepts of conversational UX design that I just mentioned along the way. And we don't have time to go through them today, but I wanted to kind of list them here and invite you guys, if you're interested to learn more about this field, please do reach out to us afterwards, and we're happy to provide any kind of resources or any kinds of things that we can share with you. Things like intents, what the user wants to do, concepts like dialogue, conversations, flows, personality and training personality into your IVA, confirmation styles, which we talked about a little bit, things like repair paths. So what happens if there's an error? How does the caller navigate through the errors? Different styles for that as well. So there's, again, a lot to this science that's really fairly new, but really cool. And then if we get, again, briefly in the next slide, we just wanted to make sure You know, we talk about design a lot. We did talk about design a lot in this webinar. Um, and smart people can sit down and design all day long, but anybody who's ever tried to design anything for humans knows that no good design survives first contact with the human. So you need to put your designs in front of people as early as possible, work out all the kinks. There's lots of different methods and tools. Again, we'll have more webinars in the series that we could talk more about these different tools and techniques for testing the IVAs. And it is bread and butter to this field. You really need to get stuff in front of humans to really know if it's working for them. And then, yeah, I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
I just wanted to make one point here, and I've seen the teams in action, both the design teams and the engineering teams, and it is striking to me how different it is to do experience testing in a voice mode for a voice application than it is to do any sort of visual application. And that could be a web, a mobile device, a chat, but it's a very different kind of thing to wrap your head around when you're saying, all right, well, I'm going to do experience testing on this. And this is one of the areas where, while there are a lot of similarities, that's a really big difference that I've seen in the way that works. So I think I just want to point that out because that was striking and worth me talking for a few more minutes.
No, hey, I'm always glad when somebody who is not a CUX designer touts the value of design and testing. So thank you. Thanks for that, Tom. Finally, again, we just throw this up here and we can follow on future webinars or contact us. Style guides, always document your style so that you can be consistent, especially in large enterprises. You don't want the IVR kind of sounding like two different people in two different conversations over the course of a single interaction with a company. So having it documented not only achieves consistency, but it also speeds up delivery, right? So as people are building, as your developers are building the IVA, they can follow a style instead of having to sort of think through a design every time. So that was really the last CUXD concept I wanted to bring up today. But I do want to toss back to Tom to summarize, and then we can start Q&A.
So just before I do the summary, though, I want to make a point that it makes sense if I'm going to have a group of robots answering the phone that they speak in a similar manner, and it doesn't seem like I'm in the midst of a same conversation with that robot that I'm being switched off from one person to another. That somebody is formal, somebody's informal, somebody uses one set of vernacular while another, that would seem strange. And so I learned a little about this from Carol and one of our colleagues recently, and it made perfect sense. So I think this is also one of these things I want to point out about CUXD that is striking to me, and how important it is. So we're going to quickly summarize, so we have a few minutes left for questions. The point of today's webinar was technology is not enough when you're building intelligent virtual agents for your contact center to talk to your customers. Conversations are complicated. To build a really effective intelligent virtual agent, it needs to start with discovery and remembering the three legs of the stool. So it's not just about how well the robot communicates with your customer. It's also about meeting the needs of the business and aligning the needs of the business, and then understanding the opportunities and constraints from a technology perspective. And then really the CUXD skills are critical to creating and designing and building IVAs that are really effective, that your callers, your customers are wanting to interact with and will continue to interact with, as opposed to flipping over to speak to a live agent. And the last point here is that Carol and her team have many tools, techniques on how to approach this that we would never have time to get through in detail, or even at a high level in this amount of time for this webinar. So more to come. Thank you all. And I think I've seen some questions come through. So Alexandra, what do you have that we might be able to answer for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys. That was a great presentation. We did get quite a few questions. So I think we all have a story about not or opting out of talking to a virtual agent or digital assistant, where we say, agent, or representative, or hit 0 to try to get out of that loop with the virtual agent. Are we going against human inclination by trying to get people to interact with these virtual agents more? How do you get people to want to talk to that robot?
Tom, you want to start?
I will say, and some of this comes from me as the customer calling, and if I feel comfortable that the robot on the other end or the technology on the other end is going to be able to solve my problem and understand me, I'm more likely to continue down the path. And I actually was on a call just the other day where, like, at some point, as I was transferring from hold before I got to a live agent, there was a robot, and it was clearly a robot that came on and asked me a few basic questions. And it was interesting. It wasn't the most friendly robot, but it did its job, and it seemed to understand what I was saying and move along quickly, so that I didn't feel like I was going to be kind of left hanging at the end and then have to start over when I spoke to a human.
Yeah, and I can add, so I have a couple of youngsters at home, and they don't like phones. They don't like people talking to people and all that. It's like, it's all about texting. It's all about, doing it yourself. So one, for the type of user, a lot of people really don't want to interact with humans. So yeah, that's a big part of it, is that inclination. And the other is, when we talk about, Tom is sick of hearing this, I'm sure, but in my mind, this is the 1994 of the World Wide Web when it comes to conversational UX and IVAs. If you put yourself in the 1994 mind space of what was it like using the internet in 1994, everything was clunky. It seemed really, kind of hard to navigate and all that kind of stuff. It got better and better, obviously, over the years, to where self-service and using the internet to do almost everything has become commonplace. So there's going to be a curve. There's going to be an adoption curve across society. But I think it's going to get better and better, and people are going to get more and more comfortable with interacting with IVAs.
Similarly, though, since IVAs have been around in some capacity for a while now, I think we all have experiences with bad IVAs that aren't as intelligent or conversational. How do you kind of capture somebody's attention immediately to get them to not skip past it, thinking it's going to be the same type of IVA that they've probably had a bad experience with in the past?
Tom, you want to go first?
Oh, I think I'll let you. That seems like a really hard question.
No one wants to answer this question.
It's a good question, but it's a hard question because you're trying to change the behavior of the caller, and they may not be very willing to try and change behavior. Yeah. So I have a kind of a stock answer, which is something that some organizations are looking at, which is, if you want to talk to a live agent, great, you get in the hold queue. But then once you're in the hold queue, and whether it's 2 minutes or 20 minutes, the offer can be made to, if you'd like to start a conversation, you can do that with a virtual agent while you're holding for a live agent, and the live agent will receive all the information that you share with the virtual agent. So that's one way to kind of pull them in, is to say, is when they're waiting, they might be more interested in kind of trying something new.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to draw on my 1994 comparison. Like, when websites tried to keep your attention back then, they would do things like put up crazy animations and do all this, this stuff that got really old really fast. They were trying to be novel. But I think what keeps people attention more than being novel is being useful. So give them something helpful. Give them some auxiliary information while they're in the queue. Tell them upfront that it's going to be a different experience, and give them some sort of nuggets of stuff that's going to be more helpful than just sort of the rote, here's what's going to happen thing. So yeah, there's opportunity.
Great, thank you guys. As IVAs become more conversational and more convincing as an actual agent, is there a need to explicitly identify that it's a robot versus an actual human agent? And at what point does that even make sense in the conversation?
So I'll start with that. I think there is an ethical consideration here. I think it's important for people to know that it's not a human. You don't have to go out of your way to say, I'm not a human. I think at some point there's going to be such an expectation that anybody who picks up a phone anywhere at an enterprise level, at a company level, is going to be a bot. So that'll make it a little bit easier. I think a lot of times it's pretty obvious that it's a bot. But I think the real no-no is to be overly trying to humanize something that's not human. I think that's misrepresentative, and it's ethically, I think it's kind of not great in my mind. So, Tom?
I would agree. I just remember the reaction when Google demonstrated their bot making a phone call to make a reservation with a hairstylist, and they had designed that virtual agent so well, and it was making an outbound call, and they built it to simulate humans. It was taking breaths, it was sighing, it was doing very non-robotic things, and the reaction was, wow, this is really cool technology. And then the other reaction was that is super creepy. And so I think I agree with you. If the robot I'm talking to sounds too much like a human and is starting to pause and say and things like that, it would be really strange to then find out later I was speaking with a robot.
We there's a term for this, right? It's the uncanny valley. It's called the uncanny valley. So that's why zombies freak us out, right? Because they're humanoid, they're close to humans. And so there's this sort of evolutionary thing that happens in our brain that if something is human, too close to being human when it shouldn't be human, it causes a visceral negative reaction. And so this uncanny valley, you need to stay away from with IVAs.
Yes, that makes sense. All right, we have 2 minutes left, so we are gonna just wrap up here. And if there are questions that weren't answered, feel free to keep putting them in the chat. We'll reach out to you directly to answer anything we missed. So before we wrap up, I just want to plug that we are having another webinar with Tom in December, how to lower contact center costs by enhancing the customer service journey with AI, where we're really going to look at what is that as-is journey in customer service, particularly in the contact center, and what are kind of the biggest pain points, the biggest friction points that most customers experience during that can be impacted with AI to really help lower your operating costs. So please register for that if that sounds like an interesting topic to you. That will be on December 15th. Otherwise, thank you. We've so enjoyed having you here with us, and thank you to Tom and Carol for an amazing presentation.
Thank you all, and thank you, Alexandra.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone.